Hello, here's my drawing of Liv Tyler as Arwen in The Lord of the Rings. I'm going to be taking you through the drawing process and talking a little bit about the movies. I'm starting with a sketch and my camera went out of focus here, so it's a little bit blurry and I lost a little bit of the footage. But I'm starting with graphite pencil. I usually use Staedtler HB graphite pencils for making the initial sketch. And the first thing that you have to worry about when drawing a sketch or before drawing the sketch is the composition and placement, where you're going to place your character that you're drawing, where the head and the face is going to be, also where your signature will be in the end. It's good to think about these things early before you start with the drawing, so it always pays off to take a few minutes to think about the composition. When you start working, as I did now with charcoal, you can start from a detail or you can start from larger shapes. I started from the ear. I laid down some of the initial darker values and then I moved on to the hair a little bit with a soft charcoal pencil. And as you can see, I'm just quickly making some of the suggestions of the shape of her hair and clothes here and there, laying down some of these darker areas. But this is just the initial stage. You can also start from larger shapes like the head and then move on to the detail, or you can go back and forth from the smaller details to the larger shapes and vice versa. You can see that I already started working on the background a little bit. I want some value in the background, and I created some circular shapes there because I want the background to look kind of like the light is coming through the woods, through the branches. You can see there isn't much of a background in my reference photo. The reference photo is in the top left, and I hope that it won't be obscuring too much of my drawing. But there's not much to see there anyway, because this is just the initial stage, and I'm just laying down some of the initial values and shapes just to see what it's going to look like. And I need some value in the background because I want contrast with the lighter parts of her hair. I'm going to be drawing highlights there, so I need to make that area darker. And it doesn't look like much in this stage. And that's one of the reasons why I like to show you the finished drawing in the beginning, because if you were to look at this, you would probably be wondering, what is this crap? But as you can see, charcoal is like that initially. It looks kind of messy, but eventually, as you progress and move on with the refining of the detail, it starts to look better and better. But one of the advantages of charcoal is that it's a lot faster to work with than pretty much any other type of medium. And obviously, since I am right-handed, I am starting from the top left, and that's one of the things that you keep in mind, where, especially when you're working with a messy medium like charcoal, you have to start from the opposite, the side that is the opposite of your hand that you're using, because I'm going to be moving from left to right and from top to bottom as I draw. And now you can see that I'm using occasionally a little bit of that charcoal powder that I create by sharpening to add a little more value to certain areas. I created some folds in the robe or the clothes that she's wearing there, and I'm going to be pulling some highlights with an eraser a little bit later. In addition to the charcoal pencils, as you can see, I'm also using a variety of blending tools. As usual, my two main blending tools are the tortillon that I make myself and various brushes, but I mostly use stiff bristle brushes because they can really push that charcoal around and blend it. Now I'm starting to work on the main part of the hair, and this area here is going to be a lot darker than the top of the head. So there's a lot of contrast between that area and the top of the head, where the light is coming from the above. And because the upper part of her head and hair is lighter, I'm going to want some contrast between that portion and the background. That's why I started working on the background a little bit and created that blurry mess in the background there. Again, laying down more of the charcoal powder to add even more value to the background to the right. And now you can see that I'm using a tortillon to create some suggestions in the background. And I also used a tortillon to shade around the forehead. I'm going to want a clean edge there, but right now I'm just fidgeting with that background a little bit to see if I can come up with some nice looking blurry shapes that look like lights or light coming through the branches. This reference photo comes from a movie still from the scene where Arwen and Frodo are being chased by the ringwraiths. In the book, as you know, it wasn't Arwen who showed up at the ford, it was another elf, Glorfindel, and he put Frodo on his horse and ordered the horse to run towards the ford. So the creators of the movie took some liberties with the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Some of them were not so good, but overall the Lord of the Rings trilogy was decent movies. As you can see now, I'm working on some highlights on the hair there. Even though she has pretty dark hair, the light is shining on it, and obviously some of these strands of hair are going to be a lot lighter than the others. And also I'm using my pencil eraser to suggest some of the shapes and structure in her hair, but I'm going to be working on that a little bit more. So I was talking about the movies. Like I said, the movies didn't turn out that bad. I'm a fan of the movies. Of course, I think that the book is vastly superior. It's a lot better. A lot of the things make a lot more sense in the book in terms of plot. And obviously the character of Arwen was modified to suit the taste of the modern audiences because of all the girl power cliche that we see in so many movies nowadays. Now I'm drawing some of the detail on her collar, but I don't have too much of a problem with it because, like I said, the movies didn't deviate too much from the book. Peter Jackson still had a lot of respect for the material while he was making Lord of the Rings. Sadly, that was not the case with The Hobbit. You can see that now I'm moving on to the detail on her face and drawing the eyebrows and the eyes, and I'm doing this with a very sharp, or a fairly sharp, charcoal pencil. I'm using a medium charcoal pencil. It's harder than the soft one and it's easier to sharpen. And these woodless charcoal pencils that I'm using lately, they don't break so easily because obviously they're thick and it's all charcoal, and it's more difficult to break and it's easier to sharpen. So you can see that I'm gonna want contrast between her face and the background. So I lay down a little bit of that darker value in front of her face to the right, which is going to serve me well for creating that contrast, but that edge is going to need to be very clean, so I'm either going to clean it up with a pencil eraser or maybe even go over the edges with a black color pencil. And as you will see a little bit later, I will be combining a black color pencil with charcoal pencil because the black color pencil can be sharpened better and it has an even finer tip, and it allows me more control when I'm drawing detail and also when I'm shading. So I'm going to be using that as well. I also like to use the brushes to spread the charcoal around. You just saw me doing that on the face. That's a quick way to shade the face. Just spreading the charcoal around with a brush. Although it's not great if you want to achieve likeness, a little more precision is usually needed, so often you have to go back in and work with some more precise tools if you want everything in its place. The background will require a lot of blending because I don't want texture to be there. I want it to look kind of blurry so that it's not too distracting. I want the person in the foreground to be a lot sharper, to have a lot sharper edges and more contrast. And I think I'm already achieving that, and as you can see now I'm moving in with a black color pencil and just shading by using my tapered stroke and cross hatching. This is a relatively slow way of shading, but it gives you a lot of control, and there is no substitute for it in my opinion if you want to shade the face properly and achieve likeness. And occasionally you can always go over it with a brush a little bit and soften some of these lines and maybe blend some charcoal with it a little bit. These two mediums actually blend pretty well as long as you don't press too hard with the black color pencil. It will be fine. I'm also using a Q-tip to soften some of those lines so that there is no texture there. I want a smoother appearance of her skin. Now I'm working on the other eye. Obviously, when shading the eyes, if you have a reflection or a highlight in the eye, it's important to shade the eyeball properly so that the reflection or the highlight stands out even more. And as you can see now, I decided to use my black color pencil to clean up those edges a little bit because I need a clean edge there. I'm going to be going back to that a few more times later. Back to the movie talk. Like I said, the Hobbit trilogy, in my opinion, was pretty bad. They deviated from the book quite a bit, and that was not a good thing. Many new characters were introduced. Again, another strong, empowered female character, which is a cliche in the modern movies, which didn't really work out that well in The Hobbit, because it added very little to the actual plot. You can see that I'm using my tapered stroke here to shade the area around the nose. Very gently and carefully. If there are any lines left when I do that, because I'm using cross-hatching essentially, I can always go over those lines a little bit with a brush or a Q-tip and soften them, and then they disappear, but the value remains. Some other characters were introduced into the Hobbit trilogy, like for example Legolas, who doesn't exist in the book, and many bad things were done, so I wouldn't recommend these movies. I thought only the first one was a little bit promising. They made some changes, but it wasn't too bad. The first movie in the Hobbit trilogy kind of sort of kept the spirit of the book, and they didn't go that far into the changing of the storyline. But as the movies progressed, things got worse and worse. So I definitely think that the Lord of the Rings trilogy is a lot better, mostly because they stuck to the reference material, which is what you should do when you have a great book that you're making a movie on. You should stick to the book and not try to get smart. So now I'm using a kneaded eraser to pick up some of the charcoal and create some of these highlights in the background. I want a blurry background that's out of focus and that looks like there is some light there in the background coming through the branches, because she is running through the woods. Obviously we won't be seeing any branches or any trees, but that's what the point of the blurry background is. Just adding a few more of these flyaway hairs here and there. That's why I created the background, to be able to have enough contrast. Now I wasn't happy with this area under the chin, so I needed to shade it a little bit more. Whenever your drawing feels a little bit flat, that's because it needs more contrast and it needs more range in value. That's why even when you finish your drawing, you always go back to it and you think, maybe I should add just a few darker areas here and there, or reinforce some of the darker areas. That's always a good thing to do, even when you think you're done. You can see that I'm doing a lot of work with the brushes, because I shaded a lot using cross-hatching, so I use the brushes to soften these lines. I don't know how much you can see them, but in real life you can see some of the traces of that shading, so I wanted to soften that a little bit more. Working on the lips now. She has a bit of an overbite, I think, Liv Tyler does, so I need to try to make it look like the upper lip is a little bit more pronounced, a little bit more protruded, and I shade the lower lip a little bit darker. You can do the same thing when you're drawing the face looked at from up front. You just shade the lower lip a little bit more, and it looks like the upper lip is a little bit more protruded. So I just need a little more shading of that lip and a few more highlights here and there. Now I'm using a pencil eraser to pull some highlights on those cheekbones. And if you feel like you've erased a little bit too much, you always soften it. You can always soften it a little bit with a brush. Just adding a few details around the face. And a few of these baby hairs. And some details on the collar. Now just to add the signature. Like I said, I already planned that it was going to be somewhere around here in the lower right corner. And that's about it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.